Morena everybody, tēnā koutou katoa and welcome to Te Kaunihera o Pōneke, Wellington City Council for our regional Wellington Region Waste Management and Minimisation Plan Joint Committee. I declare the meeting open and I would like us all to etu I te karakia. And in true Wellington style, we are certainly feeling the winds and the bracing breezes flow over the land and sea today. Okay, please let myself or the Democracy Advisor know if you intend to leave the meeting. And please note that the meeting is being live streamed and we will adjourn at 10:30 for a morning tea. We have a few new faces around the table, so please welcome Councillor Fraser Mailman. It's great to have you here. Very good. Who has replaced Councillor Sandy Ryan from the Masterton District Council. Is that correct? Great. As well as Rob Stockley, who is now the alternate councillor for Carterton District Council. And Rob, I believe that you are on Zoom?
Yes, that's correct, Madam Chair.
Great. Welcome, Councillor Stockley. And we've also got Councillors Greathead, Colenso, Councillors Elliott and Councillor Lee on Zoom as well. Good. Great. Are there any apologies for today? Lateness from Councillor Taylor, and I haven't heard from Councillor Hayward, so normally he would have texted. Do you know?
Councillor Hayward.
Yes. Good. And it's pretty crazy out there, so I'm sure we might see him soon. Okay.
And apologies for early departure at 10:30.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Okay. Can I have a seconder for accepting these apologies, please? Thank you, Councillor Edwards. I now put the motion, which has been moved and seconded. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Great. Anyone against? Anyone wishing to abstain? Great. I declare that motion is carried. Okay, do we have, we're at the conflict of interest declarations. I call on members to declare any conflicts of interest that they may have in relation to items on the agenda. I see none. Okay, and now we'll move to confirmation of minutes. So I move the motion that the Wellington Region Waste Management and Minimisation Plan Joint Committee held on the 7th of September 2020 having been circulated and that they have been taken as read and confirmed as an accurate record of the meeting. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Edwards. And I'm not sure if this is the right time, but I do just want to bring up that, Councillor Lee, you asked for a report on the sewage drying facility to be on the agenda as part of an oral report. And so what we'll do is we won't be able to do that at this meeting, but afterwards in the workshop we can discuss where Wellington City Council got with that. Are you happy with that? Thank you. Great. So I will now put the motion, which has been moved and seconded. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Great. Great. Anyone against? Kia ora, Councillor Hayward. Welcome. Haere mai. I declare the motion carried. Oh, anyone wishing to abstain, sorry. That was around minutes, Councillor Hayward, from last week. Oh, good, thank you. Great to have you here. Great, so I declare the motion carried. Items not on the agenda. there are no items not on the agenda today. And so now we move to public participation. So I welcome Gordon Legge, direct. I beg your pardon? Great. That makes it easy. I was trying to put some, lovely dialect twirl on that. But you are the director of the board to the table. Director of the board to the table. Welcome up. So Gordon has come to speak about waste to energy technology. So Gordon, you have 10 minutes. If you can please leave a bit of time for questions, that would be great. And there's a green, if you press the volume, there's a green button, that a green light will come on, and then you'll have a microphone. So
we're away laughing.
Yay. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I represent a company called The Board. We have some American waste to energy technology that I would like to talk to you about and put in front of you. I know you're about waste minimisation, but elimination is sort of the ultimate minimisation, really. So we'll just quickly go through this, and then you can ask me questions. The board was set up several years ago to apply environmentally friendly solutions to infrastructure problems. You can all read that in front of you. We're all about the elimination of landfills and toxic waste. So basically, we're going to take your metropolitan solid waste, dry it, treat it, and then put it through a process called gasification, which is going to turn it into electricity. The product that we end up with, which is those little pellets that you can see there, or the stuff next to it, can also be used as a coal substitute if you didn't want to generate electricity with it. So that's what a plant looks like. There's plants operating in several places in the world, but California is probably the easiest and biggest. As part of the build of the plant, they put up a environmental facility in the plant so they can have school children and parties going through to see what we're doing. So your metropolitan waste comes into the plant. It's heated, dried, treated, and turned it into either pellets or nice clean electricity and water. And I suppose the big question you'll want to know is, how much is it going to cost? Well, the answer is nothing. We get an agreement from you for you to buy the electricity off us, at which will be at a comparable rate to whatever the council or the local electricity authority is selling you electricity out at the moment. You can read it all there. Now the pellets or fluff, and if you didn't want to use them to generate electricity, could be sold to a power station or sold to somebody who uses coal, like a Fonterra. Or you can sell the fuel on the international energy market. So the outcomes: no more landfill. We can also, as part of the process, take existing landfills and recover them. So we can dig up the toxic waste from existing landfills, and as part of the process we can treat that and turn those landfills back into clean earth. And in 30 years' time, we gift you the plant. And also, as part of the process, the plant can produce housing components. The pellets can be used as an insulation material to provide cheap, low-cost housing. Any questions? Please.
Any questions on Zoom?
Yes.
Councillor Elliott.
Hi, good morning. That was really impressive. Can we possibly have a copy of your presentation to take with us to work with?
Absolutely.
And what's the interest been like with other councils around the country if you have presented before?
You are the first I've presented to. In
Okay.
Auckland, we have been talking to the council, but they're nowhere near as proactive as you are.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we know that.
If no one else has a question, I have one. Is there any evidence that this technology has led to waste minimisation? Because that feels like the first issue that needs to be dealt with.
Well, we have taken all your metropolitan waste and stopped it going to a landfill. So we've turned it into these pellets. The pellets then go through a process called gasification, which turns them into electricity. And all we're left with is a bit of dry powder at the end. So there is no landfill required anymore.
I think the point was, is there any evidence to show that further up the chain that there is a reduction in waste? Because ultimately we need to stop the use of resources and wasting resources. So that's where I was asking if there's a...
So if part of the process there was a reduction in waste going to the plant, not really, no. No, ours is a treatment and elimination rather than a reduction. It's a total elimination.
And have you had any? Have you been to talk to MFE at all about how it sits with their overarching view for the country?
No, I haven't.
Could be a good place to start as well.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Edwards.
Thanks. As a former journalist, there's always a bit of a sceptic in me. This sounds amazing. Where does your company make some money, and what are the downsides of this technology? There always seems to be downsides with...
The downside would be that it didn't work, that we had signed an agreement and we couldn't deliver on what we promised. But we could take you to the plant and, COVID willing, we could take you to the plant in California and show you it in action. We could set up Zoom interviews with people at the California plant so that you could see what was happening and be confident that what you were getting did deliver on what we promised. And as regards remuneration, I'm paid a small fee for delivering.
Sorry, forgive me, you're a commercial company?
Yes, yep.
Exciting sort of proposal, so there must, and I heard you say that we would need to buy the electricity that is produced by the plant at comparable rates that are available in New Zealand.
Correct. Well, the council wouldn't have to buy the electricity, but as part of the agreement, we would need to find a party that contracted to buy the electricity from the plant.
So yes, sorry for me being, but you're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. There must be some payback for your company, and I'm just wondering where that is.
In the sale of the electricity. So you contract to give us your metropolitan waste, your rubbish.
Right.
Somebody at the other end contracts to buy the electricity off us. So we make a return by selling that electricity.
And that's enough for it to be viable?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Very interesting. Thanks.
Yeah.
Councillor
Question
Marlin.
from Zoom.
There is a key that we need a 500 tonne of rubbish to make it viable a day. So while it, yes, would work in smaller areas, we would need to combine smaller areas to create a larger area. So if you're from sunny downtown Masterton, your rubbish, instead of being dumped locally, would be moved to a regional facility where it would be treated along with Wellington's rubbish.
And one
a
more.
hand up on Zoom.
Oh, Councillor Lee.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question around numbers. What is the startup cost and the operating cost? And I think you answered the last one, which was around what are the volumes required daily?
So the volume required is around 500 tonne. The setup costs are borne by US Green, and the operational and running costs are borne by US Green. So they cover all the costs of setting the plant up, building the plant, manning it, training local staff to run it, and then at the end of the 30-year period, they gift the plant.
So transportation costs would probably be one of the bigger ones as well. Would that be correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Kia ora, Gordon. That's perfect timing. Thank you so much for coming
My pleasure.
to
Thank you
speak
for
with
having
us. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this goes.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That's quite a lot on a daily basis. Kia ora. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, and welcome, Councillor Taylor. Great to have you. Thank you for coming today. We're impressed with anyone that made it into the room. So I know that people were blown about and rained on to get here. So well done. Great. So now we'll move into general business. So we've got the WMMP 3-year work program. So item 2.1, and I will introduce the paper. You will have noticed that the previous item 2.1 is now no longer on the agenda. So formal meetings are a more appropriate forum for written reports only, as it has been kindly pointed out to us. So what we will do when we wrap up the meeting, we will have a workshop style conversation, which is probably more appropriate anyway for where everyone's at. So I will introduce this paper, and I do want to acknowledge the work that's gone on here, and I'm very thankful for it. I think one of the challenges is trying to keep across this very complex set of actions that each council is working on. So it is really useful to see it in a report like this. So are there any questions for officers? And would someone like to take the questions, or will it be from each council? Is everyone comfortable? Do you want to come up? Anyone would like to come up? We feel a bit lonely. Maybe David and Jörn? Great. So were there any questions, councillors, for this report? Zoom councillors, any questions? No? Okay. I have some. So the first one is just around the data collection system as we're all moving into the data collection framework. I guess the first question would be, is that system planned to be integrated across so that all the councils can feed the information into one central space, and then would that go into a natural, clearly still in the weekend mode, a nationwide database, since that is how we're reporting, the reason why we're reporting into that?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Most likely, what we would be looking for initially is a regional solution, which may mean a common software platform that we're all using, or at the very least, whichever platform each individual council uses has the requirement that data can be seamlessly shared and brought together into a single reporting system. Nationally, I don't know.
Just to expand on that point, so just to be clear, we still have to scope out the more detailed work in order to then design the system. So as soon as all the councils have progressed their bylaws through their individual processes, in parallel, we're also starting work on scoping out the more detailed work to actually develop the licensing and in terms of what's actually collected indeed and later on.
Right, thanks, Ewan. That makes good sense. Thank you for answering that. And as far as, so that's been no direction from MFE then in what they're requiring, like in what information they're after?
The short answer is no. So MFE does collect some data, especially around our waste levy spends. But in terms of the waste data framework, the data it collects may not be the same data that we are interested in at a more granular level. So they are looking at the more high level information as opposed to the more detailed granular level that we might be interested in.
Great, thank you, and that makes sense as well. Just in a more individual council basis, for Lower Hutt, I just want to congratulate, I mean, this relates to the next paper as well, but there does seem to be, it's really great to see a decentralised resource recovery system starting to evolve. So that was something that was very clear to me, which I'm very excited about. But I guess one of the questions around that, are there processes in place, or will that be part of the scoping work, to be working with business and industry to understand what will support them, or how we could work with them on understanding their drivers to want to start changing the system they have in place?
Madam Chair, just a clarification. So is this a question about Hutt City Council or more generally?
It started as a Hutt City Council question, but then it is. So actually, each council will have a different way that they're approaching this. So maybe if I take the regional approach, that yeah, we've got an opportunity here. It kind of lends into the bylaw, really, but are we taking an opportunity to work with businesses to understand how the changes or the new systems that we might put in place, meaning resource recovery, would help or support them to want to take up the services?
So I can only answer from a Hutt City Council perspective, but
I understand.
So for I'll just quickly talk through the approach at our end. So the bylaw will be in place early next year. Some of these things will then link through to businesses in terms of event organisers, C&D, construction, demolition, waste plans, which will be about a year before they actually are required. In the meantime, there's some work underway in the solid waste space around improving resource recovery going forward, and there is just about a paper to go up to our council that is looking at the budgets for that particular area, and we're looking at proposing some changes to our transfer station. Some of those will then have flow-on effects in terms of resource recovery at that particular infrastructure. So, establishing a free-to-use resource recovery area, opportunities for diverting some waste streams like green waste, for example. With regard to C&D waste and some of the like food organics or potentially a food collection system, that work has yet to commence. So there are still some other pieces of work that have to be put in place to then inform decision making on that. So coming back to resource recovery, there are several layers to resource recovery, and at the moment we're trying to chew off one bite at a time.
Thank you, and fully appreciate that. The Wairarapa, it was good to see your work linking into the district plan. Can you explain, is there someone that can explain that a little bit better about what's actually going on there? I haven't got the page open, sorry. As we're also going into the district plan, it would be really useful to just understand a bit about what you're doing there. So that was on page 22 and number 2.3.
Yeah, good morning. David Hopman from Marston Industry Council. The Wairarapa has a combined district plan. The three councils have a common platform. There are differences in it. That particular reference there is our district plan is up for review. We've started that process, but it'll begin in earnest next year. And district plan reviews are always challenging, especially under this changing environment. What we're referring to there is making sure that we do have provisions when we look at planning rules around more intensive developments, make sure that recycling and rubbish collection is factored into some of those developments. So that's what has been referred to there. We do have rules and provision to do that, but we've also recognised that will be added pressures in the next decade, 15 years. So we're looking at planning for that. So it is very much at an early stage.
Kia ora, David. Thank you. Yes, we're going into ours as well. So, and that growth, is a really important part. Seeing forward there. Did anyone else have any questions at all? Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was hoping to have someone just answer a specific question relating to Hutt City Council's work, E7, Waste Minimisation, Behavioural Change. Sounds like a fascinating subject. What do you anticipate as the time frame for some insights from that work to be able to be shared with this group in terms of the implications for the regional context? Because obviously behavioural change may not necessarily be that different from council to council to council.
Yeah, I can explain that. So there's two parallel work streams. There is the immediate priority in terms of our rubbish and recycling changes, which means we have to engage with every household regardless. And so as part of that, we want to use that opportunity also to improve education around what residents can do to minimise their waste, when we actually roll out the system. Then there is a separate piece of work around behaviour change. So that's going beyond just rubbish and recycling. It's going into the wider waste minimisation space. And one thing that we've identified that there isn't a whole lot of good data about what are the reasons for why people don't change behaviour, or what can we do better to actually make them change behaviour. And one thing to be clear on is just because we do education or we run a communications campaign doesn't mean suddenly that people change their behaviour. So there is a difference between education and then achieving behaviour change. So there is, our marketing team is currently scoping some work around getting better evidence on this. So doing some research to then understand what are the drivers for behaviour change, which levers do we might have to pull to then change that. So that work, doing that research itself will take 3 to 6 months. So it has to be in parallel and would probably not be finished until after we've rolled out the rubbish and recycling changes or implemented the new system. So these two things have to be run in parallel. Once that research is complete, we may then use, I'm kind of hoping to use that to inform our work around waste minimisation. So what sort of programs do we actually run? In the past, you've got our action plan here, and it's quite clear on some of the initiatives we're doing in Enviro Schools, sustainable parenting workshops and all those sort of things. But one thing we're not very clear on is to what degree does this actually result in behaviour change? So do we just run more of these things, or do we do something different? So some of that work but won't be completed till probably 6 to 9 months from now.
The Councillor Hayward.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question on that, because to be fair, my question is probably around that latter point, around behavioural change, especially at the end user. If I've understood, the work is around a critique of existing techniques as well as looking at the behavioural drivers, or is it, have I got that incorrect, and that actually it's more of one than the other?
I don't think it's necessarily a critique of the things or the actions that we're currently doing, but it's trying to go back to the original point of the starting point. So when we design a program, we need to understand what's going on in the market. Now, we have been running these initiatives for quite some time, but without necessarily being clear on, is it actually resulting in behaviour change? How do we really measure this? Just because we run a sort waste portal doesn't necessarily mean that, we have 1,000 engagements. Does that actually change behaviour? Do we actually see that flowing through in terms of people diverting more waste from landfill, for example? So it may well then be useful in informing, okay, well, instead of doing more of these, we do a few other things as a result of that research. But the research is really just understanding what are residents, what is their drivers, what are some of the constraints they face to change behaviour. So it's really taking an evidence-based approach and then building a program on top of that. And it may well lead to some critique of existing initiatives, and then we may change some things, but that's sort of a second stage to this.
Councillor Lee.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. My question is around the data, and I know the main driver is around waste minimisation and the data gathering around volumetric waste. But is there a work stream which also looks at the greenhouse gas numbers, because it's becoming more linked in terms of waste and emissions as well, especially given that there are now liabilities associated with especially organics going to landfill. Is there a work stream which looks at both of those two drivers now? Just more than just volumetric data, and also looking at the greenhouse gas emissions.
Not specifically. Yeah, so not specifically, and it's quite interesting when you look at our existing WMMP, our Waste Minimisation Management Plan, sorry for the use of acronyms, it actually doesn't talk much about climate change at all, or the link between waste and carbon reductions. It's probably more indirect in terms of how it flows through our individual work programs, and for example, diverting green waste will then reduce methane production in a landfill, and therefore you have a carbon benefit, at least on that front. But I don't think, at least from a Hutt City Council perspective, there are still some knowledge gaps around how exactly will a particular action reduce, or to the extent it will reduce emissions at the landfill. So, for example, if we were to take out, which is what we're currently working on, diverting green waste from landfill, how does that flow through in terms of a reduction in emissions, or at least a reduction in our emissions liability at the landfill?
Yeah, I think in the past few years, the greenhouse gas component wasn't front of stage. It's only now when the 2-for-1 regime has come off, it has now been more of an economic issue for solid waste, especially the organics.
Madam Chair, just to offer a thought from PCC, I think we're looking to adopt our climate change strategy next week or the week after, which is obviously a piece of work being developed under the Climate Change and Response Act, whereas the WMMP is a piece of work developed under the Waste Management Act. So just to point out that whereas we've discovered this massive intersect and mutual benefit between the two, if I were looking at one or the other, I would just say to be aware that each of those two pieces of legislation are targeted at a slightly different thing, bearing in mind that intersect occurs. And as we've been developing our climate change strategy over the last year, I've frequently input with regards to the greenhouse gas emissions and impact of the landfill, but they are developed with two different purposes in mind, two different drivers.
Do you have a comment to that, Councillor Lee?
Yes, I think that's where we need to head, is that there are two work streams which probably need, or two drivers which are now starting to be linked, and it is around emissions or ETS liabilities, and which means that what we look at in terms of waste minimisation is going to have a strong driver towards how we reduce our emissions, whether it's through our various climate change initiatives for each of the TAs. And a lot of it's going to be driven by the economics of it. So maybe that's a future workshop.
Agreed. Yes, I don't have a comment on that right now, but is that, I think actually what I was getting to was, did we, in our last report, when we were reporting annually, talk about putting a carbon emissions measurement in there? I don't think we did.
No, Madam Chair, but
Ninka, do you want to come forward, please?
Because if we put a carbon emission lens over our work program, it could actually inform our future decision making.
Agreed.
I just wanted to comment then on the 7th of September, we talked about this subject as well, and we referred to the regional greenhouse gas report that we do every 3 years, which talks about emissions from landfills as well, and the capture we do at the landfills that we have in the Wellington region. So it is already captured in a different work stream that focuses on bringing down emissions from the region as well as our district, as well as our own council footprint. So it's already captured somewhere, and also councils that measure their own footprint by Toitu or other means do the same thing. So there is a work stream where all of this information is available.
Any other comments that I'm realising this is out of the meeting. Maybe this is a good discussion for the workshop. I do want to acknowledge what we are discussing here, and I do acknowledge, Councillor Lee, that that this could help shape the future of this committee. But as we go through the process, I would ask that this keeps coming up, and as we're putting in reporting down the track, that might help guide some of the. It might become part, it would be a good place to become part of that reporting, but I appreciate that that work is being done under another umbrella and there's no point in duplicating it. However, it's personally one of my big drivers for, wanting to be a portfolio lead in this space. So I think that would be a note today. Does that need to be an amendment? Not necessarily? Okay. Thank you. Are there questions on this paper? No, I see none. Actually, I then just have one for Porirua, just about the, Spicer, the resource consent process. So you're saying here it's going to take up to 3 years to get the resource consent process. Can we understand why it's going to take so long?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Barely understand it myself, to be honest. This is a Resource Management Act process. We do expect that there's going to be at least a full season worth of data gathering to be done, groundwater monitoring, before we're able to even start putting the actual application itself together. At the outset, we're looking at between 10 and 12 highly specialised reports to back that application up. Some of them are literally going to take 12 months just to start getting that data ready. With the type of consent that it is, being a landfill, I do expect that there are going to be points at which we have, shall we say, keen community interest in it, and that will be a significant part of the process as well. So, as I say, at the outset, we've said this is possibly a three-year journey to get this particular consent, which is why we've started it so very, very early prior to the expiry of the current one.
And does the consent relate to extension at all, or just to exist?
No, a part of the consent will be for extension. So the current designation does not allow for the next cell which we're building, which will step outside the designated area, but not by double or anything like that, but just enough outside that needs to be taken into account.
And just on the landfill pricing, can you just give a brief update on what's going on with that for Porirua and the why? I know I'm privy to this, but just...
Yeah, so I presented a report to the Wastewater Treatment Plant and Landfill Joint Committee back on 5 November, I think it was, and one of the reports presented was requesting that the Joint Committee approve a price increase to take effect from 1 February, and that price increase is to offset the effect of the carbon credit unit price increase which we had earlier this year. Porirua City has been carrying some of that increase for some of the year, but we cannot go forward sustainably with that. So that is that 1 February increase. It amounts to, in very approximate terms, just short of 10% price increase across the board.
Kia ora. Thank you, David. Great. Any other questions? All good? Okay. Thank you, officers. That's been, really good piece of work, and thank you for that. It's really good to see what's going on, and I do commend everyone for the work that they are doing in this place. It is significant, and but I think we can see by the next paper that our community is really expecting it. So I do urge you to tell the good news story where you can about the work that is going on. Great, yes. So I need to move the motion. So I'll move the motion being the recommendation in the officer's report. Yeah, I'll put that in there. Great. Is there a seconder for the motion? Great. Thank you, Councillor Hayward. Is there any debate? Oh, okay. Yes, and I just around process, I just need to make it clear that I'm including an amendment as part of this paper. Can I just check that everyone's managed to see the amendment? Great. So we'll just bring that as part of the debate. Great. Great. Is there a seconder for the motion? Great. Councillor Edwards. Is there any debate? Did everyone have an understanding of the amendment, and that was obviously okay? Everyone's managed to see that? Great. So really what this is asking to do, it is a letter to go from this committee to all of the mayors and CEOs to remind them that we have a commitment as part of our Wellington Regional Waste Management Minimisation Plan to reduce waste by half, and that each council has a strategy or work in place to help make that happen. So it's really just a reminder urging councils to make sure that this commitment is part of the long-term plan. Great, okay. To me, I don't need one. I now put the motion which has been moved and seconded. Those in favour, raise your hand. Those against. Anyone against? No. Okay. Anyone wishing to abstain? Carried. Great. I declare the motion carried. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the second item 2.2, the WMMP Overview of Resource Recovery. So I will introduce the report. Are there any questions for officers on this report? Not seeing, then probably what I would like to bring up is that we requested this report by an amendment at the last committee. And so what we have, but the amendment actually requested possible financial pathways, which is not part of our terms of reference to be able to request this. So the officers have prepared basically an overview of what's happening, which is really also great to see, and also included the Tonkin and Taylor report on the C&D waste, which was very useful. Thank you for including that alongside that. And also an update on our commitments as part of the WMMP in this area. So is there any debate or discussion on this? Any questions for officers? Sorry, questions? Councillor Edwards? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm struggling to get my head around, and it goes back to the amendment that we've just passed about encouraging councils to sort of look ahead for their long-term plan and keep in mind waste management and minimisation. We're obviously, and of course all councils are debating their long-term plans, now, and obviously we're not able to give them any further financial where there's no business cases for a shared construction or demolition facility, or there's no business case for organic. I'm just struggling how we can encourage councils to be aware that these work streams are underway and will be coming up in the next year or two. Maybe the way to do it is in this letter that we're sending to sort of outline some of the things that we're working on and where we're at with where we're at. I guess that's the best we can do.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. I concur. Had the exact same thoughts myself. Maybe could we ask officers to bring a suggestion, because it feels like there's a gap there in the how do we do this? And it's particularly, I just want to note also that the purpose or the opportunity was around potential application of funding to government, and you've brought up in the report about the gaps, and so we can see that we're all moving toward this. But I guess a really good example for Wellington is the Flight Plastics, who have seen a gap and have created a system for that. And so an example could be like the Green Gorilla system in Auckland, whereby we've come to an understanding, and there could be an opportunity there as a region, and even the idea might be to sell it on to a private operator in the long run, but sometimes we need that council help to get something like that going. So question is, could officers advise on how we get to that place? And the question around particularly, is a letter, this right to add into the letter that we are seeking financial support in the long-term plan, even around a business case for the next stage, so that when we get to the next long-term plan, we're deciding on that thing then.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, in relation to PCC, firstly, excuse me. Oh, dear. So Poterea City Council has asked for a workshop, thanks you, asked for a workshop with our councillors, I think it's early February, and what we're going to be presenting is a piece of work that's being done at the moment, which looks at the overall picture of resource recovery, the waste hierarchy, etc. And the idea is to make sure that our councillors are familiar, as our own representative is, with all of the work that does need to be done on the full waste hierarchy. So there are a number of steps in that hierarchy to which will require different actions. With respect to business case or financial planning, there is quite a bit of work that needs to be done, and we've talked about the waste data framework, operators licensing, in order to be able to get the background data that's going to be required to put any substantial or defensible case forward for the likes of a regionally shared facility, for example. And we did speak about this at the last JC and offered the thought that actually the 2021 LTP is going to be too soon for us to present a really financially viable, defendable case. to be setting up funding for, but that the 2024 LTP would be about the right spot, given that by then we could have had at least a year's worth of that waste data coming in already. However, as I say, from our local perspective of PCC, we are at least going to be prepping our councillors with some really good understanding of the space in its entirety. We are also, there is an application from PCC to some MFE funding to do some early investigation into what potential business cases there might be. And that would be information, obviously, that we would share with the rest of the regional, with our partners as well, to see what we've found. Just wondering if anyone else wanted to add to that.
Yes, I can add to that. For Kapiti Coast, we have in this, the focus of the next 3 years is basically to get our own house in order when it comes to C&D waste recovery options. And Ruth has already met with Nigel from Porirua as well, so we're looking south and north to see where we can work together. So I think it's important to create local options, which if we then work together will upscale the market and actually create a demand for the products that you're recovering. The biggest issue is finding a market where your product actually goes once you take it out of the waste stream. And that's something that is still not very well developed throughout the country, I would say. So I think it is a combination of levying C&D landfills, which will happen next year, that will drive data capture, hopefully. Our data framework that we will use, it was developed nationally by Wastemin. So if councils all fall into place and use the same data, even though we may not have a national IT system, if we're all capturing it the same way, it's actually usable. Because any type of facility that you build need to be at least at regional scale to make it affordable and make it a good investment. And you would also want to be ready to actually ask for funding from MFE. It's made very clear that the new levy increased income will be spent on building those facilities onshore. So that's when we want to be ready to ask for 50% funding on FFE, what we're then co-funding as councils. So in Kapiti, we've put in $500,000 in year 2, research in year 1, in year 2, making physical on-the-ground changes in our transfer station and the surrounding areas to actually work with those operators that can do that diversion and find the markets for it. And that's where we will definitely, so it is not that officers are actually continuing this in the background. We're trying to develop these things, but as far as funding, it's too far, it's too close by to do that in the LTP 21.
Thank you. That's a great explanation. Councillor Hayward.
I agree. Thank you for the explanation. If I take this as a high level, and perhaps it might be easier for me to summarise this, notwithstanding the nuances and what I'm about to say, what I'm getting the sense of is long-term plan 21 for councils is going to be get the data. Long-term plan 24 is set the business case. Long-term plan 27 is to build or resource whatever capabilities come out of that business case, whatever it may be. Now, if that be true, we are talking about at least 7 to 10 years before the people who we represent are going to see any tangible physical process in that context. How do we approach that with people who are already asking for us to demonstrate political leadership on this issue?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. It will be well before the 2027 LTP that we will have had a number of approaches from a number of private operators looking for support to set up. At PCC, for example, we have allowed Trash Palace, our landfill-based recovery resale point, to open up a little bit of space to sell some recovered material, windows, doors, aluminium joinery, but it is only very, very small, and it will only ever cater for a very small sort of domestic type drop-off. With regards to a substantial or significant facility, repeating the point, well before the next 5 years, and there are a number of operators already having such discussions, something will be opened up, and the role of the region is to be prepared to be stepping up to be a partner, if you like, not necessarily a major funder, but certainly part of the chain, so that we're part of the discussion.
I can add some commentary in terms of the Hutt City Council side of things. So my expectation is that over the next 6 to 8 months, at least at an officer level, we will do more work on a business case for some sort of facility around construction and demolition waste, for example. The reason why, at least at our end, there's nothing that's gone into the current long-term plan process around this is twofold. One is there's been a huge focus on a number of carbon reduction projects on the moving out of gas for our pools, moving into or setting up potentially an EV charging station network within the city, and also some of the things around that actually probably should have happened 2-3 years ago, like our supplementary flare, which is just being installed at the moment, and also the changes to our transfer station, which have taken quite a long time to just get to the start line. So it's not that we didn't want to, it's more like we just didn't have capacity to also look at that business case, which we need to then apply for funding. So yes, we could easily say, well, let's put aside, say, 3-4 million over the next 2-3 years to do something. The question I need to answer though is, okay, well, what's the justification for just putting aside a chunk of money for that? And it's really, we need to do that work to then come back to council and say, and this is why, so that we have a strong case. Because I don't want to send something up that then gets shot down because it wasn't thoroughly thought through. And let's not forget also that the waste levy increase, which hasn't been regulated yet, it has been announced but hasn't been regulated yet, that was only announced recently. So that is a bit of a game changer, because until that was announced, there wasn't a whole lot of reason to look at that, because it wouldn't be an incentive for anyone to start looking at diverting this waste. So the waste levy increases, the bylaw development, the increasing focus by the New Zealand government now on waste minimisation, all these things are now starting to come together. In an ideal world, that would have happened a year earlier, so we would have had time to think about it for the long-term plan. But in reality, we're sort of a little bit late for this current LTP to really go big, if you like, at least from an officer perspective at a Hutt City Council.
Thank you for that. I only make the point that we are confronted by two equally potent pressures here. One, to make evidence-based decision-making, and the other, to demonstrate clear leadership and strong leadership to our communities. This happens all the time in a range of subjects. I appreciate your feedback and candour on the subjects, particularly from your local council perspectives, but bear in mind that as elected councillors, we still also have to go out and talk to Hohepa Six-Pack about this as well. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. I appreciate that. Yes, it is a tricky line to walk. Councillor Elliott, have you a question?
Sorry, not a question, Madam Chair. Can I possibly respond to the question by Councillor Hayward?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward, what we did in Kapiti for 6 months last year was had a mayoral task force on waste minimisation, and the report from that, through that work, 6 months work, we identified the best methods to reduce waste in the future, and we put together a work plan. It was a really in-depth piece of work carried out with staff support and members of the public. And it has basically put a plan on the page for us as of the beginning of this year. So the work that Ruth is doing right now over C&D, I can relate directly back to an action in that plan. So just a suggestion.
Thank you, Councillor.
Kia ora, Councillor Elliott. Is that work on your website at all? The outcome of the mayoral task force, because I wasn't aware of that.
Yes, certainly. You'll find that report, probably it should be under reports. However, I can send a link to it to you.
Great. Can we get that sent round to all councillors? Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a report for Wellington, actually. Just got a little bit more into the C&D report last night. It did, like, space is obviously a big challenge for us around the whole region, especially as housing is the priority. But the Kiwi Point Quarry, have we done any work with them on what some resource recovery, particularly around the aggregate? Have we done any work with them on that? If there is an opportunity at all?
So that's managed by it's not managed by the waste unit, but there are certainly discussions happening, not so much about recycling aggregate or doing any recycling there, but what might be used, what could be done at the site once it's done with.
Awesome, thank you, Emily. I can feel 100 million questions barrelling in, but I'll just refrain. Councillor Lee. Councillor Lee, did you have a question?
No, that was my hand up for the previous item.
Okay. You'll miss out on morning tea as well. Councillor Elliott, were you waving your hand again? Can't hear. No. Okay. I've got a raft of questions, but I think I might just hold them. But I think the bit that I'm still kind of wanting to understand is to do a business case for this. And I'm no expert here, but I'm thinking, is it wrong to establish like a 100 to 200K maximum, kind of to do a business case for where the opportunities might be? And so I guess it seems like a pitiful amount to put into an LTP, but that's really what this was angling at. Like how do we get the way to do the business case, even if it is down the track, it's still got to be in there. So is it that's still a timing issue for officers, or?
So, Madam Chair, there's actually two ways that could happen. The first way is that each of our council reps comes back and looks for a little bit of funding from us to be put in our bids for the LTP, and I say bid because even if we drop something in, it doesn't necessarily go through the process. So obviously this committee itself can't raise that funding, but your representatives could be asked to go back, and it would be a matter of, as you say, a nominally agreed amount that we each put in. The second way is that at PCC, for example, we are seeking funding for work along those lines anyway, and I mentioned the MFE application to help us to do that. So once the LTP has been signed off, or even in the scope of this current annual plan year that we're in right now, there is nothing to say a council representative couldn't go back to us and say, have you got the availability within your current budget, for example? So there's two ways of doing it. Two ways. We either make a proposal for a new targeted piece of funding for the LTP, or probably a weaker proposition, I would think, knowing the budget controls we have, that possibly there's BAU funding that could be used if we wanted to kick something off a little ahead of the LTP. Sorry, if I may add something else there, Madam Chair, is it would need to be a very well-written proposal that we know exactly what it is we're being asked to do. Yep.
Is everyone comfortable if we... Sorry, Ninka, do you want to feed into that?
Yes, I do want to bring up resourcing. we have one waste manager in Kapiti, and we're implementing a bylaw which will be a massive program in the next 3 years, licensing, data capture. On top of that, Ruth is developing a strategic program to do resource recovery in Kapiti. I just wanted to point out there are only so many hours in a day. So yes, developing a business case may actually amount to hiring Tonking and Taylor, doing something for us again, because from a Kapiti perspective, I don't see that it's an issue to resource it. And another thing I like to point out, in the resource recovery space, it's highly likely that facilities will be built by industry and not so much by councils, because often we're not the owners of those waste streams. We have perfectly good options and recovery resource already from industry for cardboard, for metal, those kinds of items, already all happening by industry. It may be a type of a joint venture. It may be us supporting industry as regulators, because we are in the resource consent space for the land use, for the land that we own as councils. There are many, many options that we will explore in Kapiti as well as part of our own process. So I just wanted to point out that industry is very ready to jump into this space and ask for funding from MFE, because they're very keen to get into the game. And often probably, if you look at financial risks, it's probably a good idea to sort of understand that the focus isn't so much on councils to deliver all of this when it comes to building large facilities that are cross regions.
David.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just going back to my comment I made in response to Councillor Hayward's question before about someone will jump into this space well before 2027, and that's exactly what Yenka was saying, that if there is a great enough customer demand, there will be a commercial response to it. And sometimes it is better for your local authority with their public money only to be acting as support or an enabler rather than taking on that commercial risk.
Really useful, thank you. Any further comments, questions? Okay. What we'll do then is I'd like to adjourn we're going to take a break for morning tea, but then we'll come back. I would just like a chance to think and speak to councillors on how, if there's a response that we would like to put in there as part of the letter. I think particularly that's the opportunity. And so maybe it would be good to have some discussion around that. So we'll take morning tea now. So it's 10:40, so back at 5:02, so 15 minutes. Great. Okay, kia ora. Thank you. Welcome back to our meeting. Apologies to those on Zoom for the time delay. Just so you know, we have been doing some work over that period, not standing around drinking cups of tea, which was very nice, and sometimes that's how you get the work done. So just before we go on to Councillor Edwards is going to bring an amendment as part of this paper, but I just have a few questions on the report. Just can officers just respond to any reason why we didn't include food waste into this report specifically, acknowledging that there are some mentions of it, but I'm just aware that there are private services that are being supplied. So, yeah, is there any reason why we didn't include food waste in the report?
Yeah, it's organic.
Madam Chair, just clarifying, are you referring to the resource recovery report, paragraphs 26 to 31, is that correct?
Correct.
Madam Chair, it's generally covered under the umbrella of organic waste.
Expand on this. We did talk about how far into the granular detail we would go with this report. So we opted to keep it relatively high level without going into the particular, some of the local options that might be in place in some areas, be that community gardens and composting initiatives and those sort of things. So they are there, but they are not covered at this high level here.
Thank you. And one more question for Kapiti, just with your composting pilot, which is exciting to read about, are you planning on targeting commercial or residential? And have you got any pricing, to incentivise, like pricing structures to incentivise?
So in Kapiti, large green waste recycling is run by Composting New Zealand. They set the rates. We don't have any involvement. For food waste, we have just funded with our grants process a trial for a digester system, which will work with 6 cafes have signed up to have their food waste collected, I think 3 times a week, and then it goes into the digester. So hopefully, fingers crossed, I think it's on a boat and has arrived this week. The digester had to come from China, so that was the biggest problem, was a large delay in getting it here. But if all goes well, it should be up and running by the end of January. So yeah, it's hopeful that 6 cafes are interested to sign up, so that's exactly where it would be going. It would be a collection targeted for businesses mostly, because at the moment we're not considering driving food waste collections from households. So it could also become a drop-off point for households in the future, who knows. Our main focus is to roll out a large composting, home composting program from January, February onwards, which will have incentives for people and vouchers to get worm farms and other facilities that they can use at their houses. So that's our main focus.
Great. And can you remind me of the name of the composting system? I should remember it. Rosie, yeah. Rosie. Okay, congratulations on that. That's exciting. We'll look forward to, hearing that, how you go with that. Just a quick question too, also on the Tonkin and Taylor report. On page 34, they outline, the key options, and as we know, the regulatory intervention, which we're already doing and have done a great work on that. Establishing processing capacity by investing in dry waste processing, so that's some of the questions we've been asking about. But they also bring up the procurement policy and say here, this option has the potential to impact on all waste materials generated on council projects. So does anyone know, I know that Wellington, we're undergoing a procurement review strategy. Can anyone give me an update on how each council is going with that? And I'll be just sending this report on to our team. I'm sure they've got it already, but it'll be good to remind them. So can anyone give me an update on where they're at with procurement? Confer? Yeah, perfect. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah,
Sorry,
great.
Madam Chair, I'll kick off. So Pororo City Council's procurement policy has just been reviewed within the last 12 months, and two key items which actually weren't quite in time to slip in. One was any climate change response embedded into our procurement process, so we just missed on that, and the other one, we haven't taken this into account either. However, as an internal policy, it's one that can be triggered for review, you know, as need may arise, so it could happen again, and we would be prepared if we needed to.
Yes, in Kapiti we have reviewed our procurement strategy as well. That's just been signed off at SLT level probably a month ago. We have a new procurement officer who's mainly working with my team to embed that sustainability aspect, which is going to be quite important, especially for our large operational contractors. So we definitely will be part of procurement discussions when large operational or infrastructure work is being procured, and we have handed out information on low emissions building materials, that kind of information to our asset managers as well. So we have been basically advocating and saying our team will be alongside you if you procure services, so that we do in fact implement that on when we procure. Yep.
Good.
So for Hutt City Council, we've had an internal project to review our procurement policy, and a new one was adopted by our leadership team in July this year. And the new policy does incorporate some new provisions around broader outcomes. So broader outcomes being not just from an environmental perspective around waste and carbon emission reductions, but also from a social perspective around things like living wage and things like that. Having said that, even though the procurement policy is now in place, that doesn't necessarily mean that suddenly everyone works to the same expectations. So there is still quite a lot of work to be done around actually implementing that internally. In some areas like curbside services, where the procurement process specifically incorporated some of those new requirements, and that's why we're now moving to, for example, half of the rubbish trucks being electric. In terms of waste minimisation for new capital investments, we're doing this more indirectly. So, for example, for the new Nainai pool, we're working with the team to aim for hasn't been agreed yet, but the idea is to aim for Green Star 5 as an established sustainability rating tool for new commercial builds. And as part of that, in order to then earn the credits, the organisation building that facility also has to achieve a number of, for example, waste minimisation objectives. So that's one way of earning those credits. So my expectation is that we would do that as part of that Green Star framework, as opposed to there being a separate requirement to develop waste minimisation plans. Having said all that, it's not yet well established internally in terms of what that might mean for smaller projects, for example. That might not mean like a smaller capital investment, upgrade to change rooms, things like that. So there's still quite a bit of work to be done to actually implement that new policy.
Good to hear it starting, and congratulations on the electric trucks too. That's pretty exciting. We might all go for a tour on one next time.
Masterton is due for its procurement review next year, so its policy will be reviewed next year. I'm not aware of the Greytown of South Wairarapa or Carterton's where they are with that. Sorry.
Is that us? Great, thank you. But I think, just reminder that the procurement lever is a really good one to pull at all times to really start to align that up to Council's overall strategy. So thank you for being able to, for knowing that and for working with that within the policy reviews that you have. And I understand that it's cultural as well, but it's a really good place to start. So thank you for that. Okay, are there any further questions on this, on the resource recovery part? No? Councillor Edwards, would you like to bring your amendment?
Yes, I'm just suggesting a change to your amendment, Madam Chair, in Clause C, just sort of strengthening the wording a little bit. In Clause B, we remind the region that we've committed to reducing waste by 1/3. So my suggestion is that Clause C would say that you remember that councils remember this commitment in the upcoming long-term plan and seriously consider increasing staff at your council in the waste minimisation area so that we can accelerate progress. And the rationale for that change is that we're getting the distinct impression this morning that councils' staff in this area are stretched to the limit, and if they had a bit more resource, then we could make faster progress on some of these things that we're talking about in tandem with whatever funding we might get from increase to the levy from landfills and so on.
Great, thank you, Councillor Edwards. So now I put us a little bit out of step there. So what we'll do is we'll adjourn for 2 minutes while we get this wording over to Heidi, and then I'll put the motion, and then we can bring that as an amendment. But thank you for doing that, bringing Thanks for your patience, everybody. We are back. So I move the motion being the recommendations in the officer's report. And we've also put in a new recommendation. So I'll just read this out for all councillors on Zoom as well. So the third addition to the recommendation is to include in the letter to territorial authorities regarding the up-and-coming long-term plan, in brackets, passed in the previous motion, that councils consider including increasing resourcing, including staff, in the waste minimisation area so that we can accelerate progress. Great. So can I have a seconder?
Very happy to second. I think we've got an additional including in there that we don't need. Consider increasing resourcing.
Thank you.
Yeah, there we go.
Couldn't hear myself for saying it. Great. Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Is there any debate? No? Okay, so Councillor Elliott.
Look, I just wanted to speak in support of this amendment. I know in Kapiti we've taken on extra educator roles, and it's been well worth it to have that work going out through all the schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. That's really good to hear. So I now put the motion, which has been moved and seconded. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Great. Those against? Anyone wishing to abstain? Great. And that has been, I declare the motion carried, and that was a unanimous, so thank you. Great. Okay, moving on to item 2.3, which is updating on the regionally consistent solid waste management and minimisation bylaw. So I will introduce the report, and really I want to acknowledge that the workload for this has had me quite flabbergasted, and I really want to acknowledge the intricate detail, like even just trying to understand it and get it through council has put me through my own level of, pushed my edge. So I can only appreciate what our officers have had to go through to get this through 8 councils. So I also want to acknowledge the collaboration that's gone on here, which I know isn't easy, and let alone the time that's had to go into that. So this is something that I'm really proud of, that our councillors have worked on as a new councillor. So I just want you to know that it's definitely an achievement, and it's done in really good faith. And I think that at the end of the day, whatever is on paper, that good faith and working together is a really important part of any success in our way forward. So yes, I can't thank you, officers, enough for all the work that's gone into this on behalf of this committee. So with that, I will open up for questions. Are there any questions for officers on this report? I've still got more questions all the time. I think probably the big one for me was just really noting that the waste operators didn't contribute. I know I've brought this up a few times, and so contribute to the submissions process. So the question I have then is, because this will impact on them quite a lot, what processes or how will we work with those businesses going forward? Because I think that also helps with what we're trying to achieve, is getting them on board rather than making them do something. So, yeah, can anyone talk about the process to that? Thank you.
I can probably. Kapiti has been licensing collectors since 2010, and the largest players in this region are already licensed by Kapiti, so that may be a form of explanation as to why there weren't that many questions from the waste sector, because it will be a similar process that we've gone through in Kapiti. So it needs to be at a regional level, obviously, and together with the regional officer, there will be a process developed that starts as soon as the bylaws are into force. And probably with a meeting with all the collectors and their representatives to just talk about how it works in Kapiti, what our vision is, how we want to step it up a level from what we're doing in Kapiti, mainly when it comes to data capture and falling in place with that national framework, obviously, is a big one. But other sort of conditions are pretty logical, I think, for collectors when it is about their behavior in the public space and how they're viewed as representing council in that public space. So yeah, there's no doubt we will report back in March when we know when that first meeting is set up and exactly what the steps in that process will be in the next year.
Kia ora, Ninka, thank you. And yes, that was the other thing I wanted to acknowledge, that through this next stage that we will, you'll develop the, how you're going to roll this out and give us an overview on what that's going to look like going forward. One more question, just around the calculator for the space for developments. How will we work on that? Will that be a project we'll work on together as well? So that's the waste, the calculation around the space for multi-unit developments for waste collection and recycling.
I can comment on that if you like. So because Hutt City Council is currently working on the implementation of the rubbish and recycling changes, we I guess in the unique position that because all those changes will apply to MUDs, multi-unit developments in Hutt City, and there's about 500 of them. I didn't know that there were that many, but there are quite a few. Some of them are reasonably small, but under the bylaw, we will use that opportunity to develop effectively a MUD waste plan, and that MUD waste plan is we're currently developing some guidance for that, which also equally will be applicable to new developers of those MUDs. And so we're currently developing the content for that guide, and we've adopted a calculator that Auckland Council has developed, and we are repurposing that for our purposes. Now, that may or may not be potentially the basis for doing something regionally on this. I mean, we're just in the position that we have to move first in terms of our rollout, but that could potentially be used to develop something a bit more regionally consistent, if you like.
Thanks, Emily.
We already have this problem in Wellington, so and are slightly more on the back foot with some of our existing MUDs, but we also have a storage calculator based off the Auckland model, so it sounds like we'll probably all look to have some kind of Wellington adaptation of the Auckland model.
Yeah, just once again, really commend you guys for working together on this, and I know it must be confusing when you've got our local challenges, but then thinking regionally as well, so thank you for doing that. Any questions from anyone else? Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I saw that Kapiti had asked for some delays on a couple of the clauses when they would come in. It's obviously up to Kapiti councillors to decide when that would happen, but I'm seeking to understand maybe their hesitation on the construction site and demolition clause and the unaddressed mail clause, in case they've thought of some wrinkles that we haven't thought of, why they want a 12-month delay and a 3-year delay for the...
For the unaddressed mail, it comes into force straight away, so I don't know where that is set, but there's no delay there. I wouldn't see a reason why I would ask for one. For C&D, yes, as I've mentioned in the previous report, we need to develop our options for resource recovery. We strongly feel that when you ask the construction sector to do something, but you actually not offer them anything in the sense of reducing that waste or diverting it, that wouldn't be good form. So we, in the next 3 years, we will develop, hopefully, those options around the Otahenger landfill site and in Otaki. We have already started with wood waste diversion. That started last month, so that's good news. And then we will fall in line and probably, well, maybe we can be on the positive side and in 2 years' time ask council to put that control in place. But the reason it's delayed is to build those resource recovery options first. I need to note, though, in the report it says that we've set a dollar value of $1 million. That's not correct. I don't know how it ended up in the report, because for the same reasons, we still need to engage with the C&D sector in full. And through that engagement, we will reach agreement on what is a reasonable dollar value. And it also is a capacity discussion within our team for the same reasons.
Thanks, my apologies. I got that wrong. It's Porirua on the unaddressed mail. Sorry.
I had originally asked for that to be set back 12 months, and it was simply to be able to give us some time to go through the process of how we would actually enforce it. Since this report was written, I've retracted that and we'll go straight to it. And without putting you on the spot, David, what about just a quick update on the Wairarapa? So did you got your submissions in, you've closed those off?
Yes, we have we have closed our submissions. We haven't got a summary report yet. I have read, we received 18, we've got a couple that want to be heard. So I can't give you any more detail than that, but our hearings are in a couple of weeks' time.
All right, good luck with that. We need a home run here, so kia ora, thank you. Great. Any other questions? I have one that might be a bit hard to answer, so I am totally up for it if you say it is difficult to answer. But just, yeah, how would you say this bylaw sits or compares nationally with other waste minimisation, management and minimisation bylaws? I get asked this one frequently in the media, so actually... Thank you, Emily.
Both our bylaw experts aren't here today.
Right, okay.
Through the development of the bylaw, we looked around the country to see what other councils were doing, and we've essentially and hopefully taken the best of what has already been put out there and tailored it to a Wellington specific way.
Thank you. Kia ora, David.
And if I can add to that, in terms of the number of us who have been through the process in order to land on a regionally consistent bylaw, and I don't know if anyone else can add to this, but it's got to be unique that 8 councils,
right, yep.
8
yes.
within the same region have landed on something which is almost identical, and that's the big achievement.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, David. It's important that we really are reminded of that. Yeah. Councillor Elliott.
Look, thank you. I'm just wondering if someone could refresh my memory. At our last meeting or the one before, we had rather a big conversation about circular delivery practices where they are overprinting and oversupplying bundles of circulars. And I just wanted to know, was there an action from that discussion, or is that something we should bring up in workshop, perhaps?
Councillor Elliott, to the best of my recollection, I think there was an action. Can any of the officers speak to that? It was regarding, was it a letter to the mayors? Or from the mayors to the industry?
To industry.
Okay.
Yes, that's my memory as well, that this joint committee would send an advocating letter or ask the mayors of the respective councils to send a letter to industry to reduce that type of waste.
Okay, and was that done?
It was my recollection we were going to make sure the bylaw was through first. So,
Okay.
so timeliness now would be, so maybe while we're in letter writing mode, we can do
Yeah.
them all. How does that sound?
That sounds great. It sounds great. Are we not in a position to write to the industry directly from this group?
Yes, we are getting nods. So actually, I'm totally fine with it. But I think it's just as powerful coming from the region, and there is, yeah, good. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott, for reminding on that. Great. Any other questions? I think we're all good. Okay. So I will move the motion being the recommendations in the officer's report. Is there a seconder for the motion? Thank you, Councillor Hayward. Is there any debate?
Yeah, do we move an amendment to add the letter?
It's already been done. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Then I would just like to formally comment that I have asked Heidi here if I could bring an amendment to say that I wanted to congratulate everybody on getting this bylaw to the stage that we have. She's advised, no, it would be better to just say it in the debate. So I am, formally acknowledging the work that's gone into this and the work of 8 councils working together. And yes, I think we should have had a better good news story on this, but the newspapers were always focused on something else. So just want to acknowledge their work. I also, that our officers have done and that the place that we're in here. Want to acknowledge that the work stream will be coming along to our next meeting, and I'm really looking forward to hearing that. I also want to acknowledge that as councillors, it's often eager for us to move, we're often eager to move on to the next thing. So please help us to be patient with understanding that there will be time needed to implement the bylaw. So councillors, asking us all to be a little bit patient there. But also, I really want to acknowledge the communities as well, and that thank you for the report on the back page there, but it really does show that we've really got the community behind us, really wanting to see these changes happening. So that was quite astounding for me, really. So that's a really great way to look at it. If you look on the back page, all the green was in support, and that's really showing that our communities are wanting to see change. So once again, that can help us to be braver, but also help us to support our officers to making more action. So yes, we ask you to leap out and tell us what we can do to support you. I think that's a really important part of making the changes that we need to. Great. Any more debate? No? Great. Okay, I now put the motion, which has been moved and seconded. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? Anyone wishing to abstain? Great, I declare the motion carried unanimously. Great, okay, so e te karakia. Actually, and just before we go into, we'll just please hang around and we'll do the workshop part after this. Uru tapu nui. Kia wātea, kia mama, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairua. I te ara takatū, koia rā e rongo, whakairea ake ki runga. Kia wātea, ai rā, kua wātea. Ngā mihi nui, everyone. Thank you for being here today. It's great.